Okay, we're in the 13th chapter of Romans. And in the 12th chapter of Romans, we took a major shift in how Paul was writing this letter. Because he spent the first 12 or 11 chapters in more or less the theology of what we believe and why we believe it. In chapter 12, he shifts direction and moves towards a very practical application to that theology. And in chapter 13, he tells everybody we must submit, everyone must submit himself or herself to the governing authority, for there's no authority except that which God has established. And I take that to mean who's ever there, God can use them, whether they know it or not. And we get those examples from the Old Testament that God uses very pagan and ungodly nations as his instruments to shape his history, to bump it in the direction he wants it to go. So, okay, then verse 2. And this is...
Wasn't that predestination in one way? I mean, everything already planned out?
Well, you could look at it that way,
Yeah, that's all.
but it's all relational. I mean, does God rig the votes in this country? Does he lay in the Roman Empire when this was written? Is God putting on the hearts of some captain of the guard to kill the emperor so he can have a coup and take over? You gotta be careful in how you interpret it. I just think God is able to use whatever is there. And when it says that he establishes them, then I look at it, they're there for his reasons. And most likely, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, probably not our reasons. Because right now, if you're a Republican, the Democrats are in, and you don't like it. Well, as I said 2 weeks ago, maybe that's who God needs in there to get done what he needs to get done to set the stage for the next level or change.
Right.
I mean,
Well, in this case, he could have done it with both of them, or either or. Not necessarily he had to use the Democrats. The Republicans would have satisfied him also.
well, when we get to this, we're going to do a little talking here. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority, and he's talking about the civil authority, is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. So
you better pay your taxes.
that's what Jesus said. At what point? Now, you got to understand. I said 2 weeks ago, in the New Testament, there's several views of how you look at the government. Paul had a very friendly relationship with Rome. He was a citizen of Rome. And I think he said he was born a citizen. When he was talking to one imperial guard, he had to buy his, and that probably cost him dearly. But Paul was a citizen, and because he was a citizen, he was afforded certain privileges. And every time he got into a tight spot, he would appeal to his citizenship. And in Philippi, he could have had the whole city council in trouble because they flogged him and threw him in stockades in prison without a trial or a hearing. And you don't do that to a Roman citizen.
Well, didn't they also not even ask him if he was a Roman citizen?
I don't know if they did or not. They did find out at the end because they wanted Paul to quietly sneak away, and he says, no, I'm not going to do it. If I'm going to go, I want to be escorted out by the city officials and really apologize for all this mayhem. When he got himself in trouble with the Jews in Jerusalem he was accused of taking, was it Timothy or Titus into the temple, a Gentile who had not been circumcised, and they were ready to lynch him right on the spot. The garrison arrested him to keep the riot from getting out of hand, and they went on trial, and they sent him to Caesarea, and he spent a lot of time in jail there. But when his case was being heard, he didn't think it was going his way, so he, as a citizen, appealed to the emperor. And so his case immediately left that jurisdiction and went to Rome. And that's why in the last chapters of Acts, he's on this ship going to Rome, because he's there to have the emperor hear his appeal. When you read Acts, it never talks about his appeal. It ends abruptly. And we don't know the outcome, so we make assumptions. So for Paul, the government, even though it is a pagan government, it is highly ungodly, and at this point in time, it's really neutral about what the church is. And so he says he can get away with saying this. But by the time you get to the Apostle John, real close to 96 AD or AD 96, that has changed. The empire has become very hostile to the church. And they're really out to get the church. And it even started, in the time of Nero. Nero was accused of blaming the Christians for burning Rome down. And we're pretty sure Nero burned Rome down himself, because he wanted to do a renewal project in the city.
Urban growth.
Urban renewal.
Shovel-ready project.
So by the time you get to the book of Revelations, the church and the state are at odds with each other. They were enemies. The church was the state was after the church. So you have these two different views. And I've always said the church in the New Testament was really never concerned about the authorities over them. They just lived in the world the best they knew how. That's why we heard Paul, live at peace with everybody that you can. Don't become hostile. Don't be slapping. Just be a citizen the best you can. And most people can do that. But there are times, and in this world today, by simply being a Christian puts you in harm's way. Not because of anything you do, anything you say, just because of who you are. And you can see it in the Muslim world attacking in the church. And it isn't necessarily just Muslim, it's just that's happening in our world. So places in the world today, you'll find the government that is at odds and hostile to the church, and you can find places in the world, mostly the Western world, where the church is at least neutral with the government. Now in our situation, it was only 30, 40 years ago, the church and the state were pretty friendly with each other. That's changing. But so you have this different views in the New Testament how we relate. And my understanding, and it is my understanding, you just do the very best you can in the situation that you find yourself in. If you find yourself in a very hostile environment with the government, walk on pins and needles.
Get your accountant.
And then if you live in a situation where there is a neutral or friendly, use it to your advantage, just like Paul did. And I will say, when the book of Revelations, John doesn't say, really kind of calls down curses on the government. He's not really happy with them. They threw him in exile on the Isle of Patmos, and that couldn't have been easy on him. Now, it says here, if you rebel, when can you rebel?
Well,
Say you could.
if you can take the consequences whenever you want.
If you've done nothing wrong.
This is where the clash comes in, is if the state requires you to do something contrary to the will of God. Now, one of the problems back in the Roman day and John's time is was the rise of the worship of the emperor cult, which you literally said that walked in and they, according to Barclay, they recorded you. That, you know, it's like your census. You go in there, you sign your name, and they mark your name. And you've got to go burn incense to the emperor and say he is Caesar's Lord. Well, Christians, that's contrary, because for them, Jesus alone is Lord. And when they couldn't do that, bad things happened. Now, within the last 2 weeks, because one thing I was asking at the convention, like Terry Stein and different ones, what did this Supreme Court ruling mean for me as a minister who is acting as an agent of the state when I perform weddings? I performed that wedding not on your authority or this church's authority, it's a state-given authority.
So as long as you perform it here, you're under the auspices of our
Well,
church.
this congregation gives me the credentials to take to the state to be able to do that. But, I don't know, of course I did run into a pastor or heard of a pastor who thinks like I do. I really don't care what the Supreme Court ruled. Because the church is a voluntary fellowship that we freely enter into this new covenant with God, which says we live differently than the rest of the world. The world can do whatever it wants. And Paul says that in Romans 1. The reason he's writing this and the reason we have the gospel is because God let these people go their own direction. And now they're really in need of a Savior. But God wasn't going to stop them. He turned them over to their depravity of their own minds. And he let them go. He's really doing that again in this world. God will allow you to go to hell in a handbasket if that's what you decide. Because one of my statements, God will never make you do anything you don't want to do, whether you're Christian or non-Christian. So the Supreme Court is ruling for the world. And so I really don't care if it's legal or not legal. It's really no skin off my nose. And if I had a friend who was homosexual and getting married, I would go to his wedding. Because he's my friend.
Right.
And that's where Jesus would be. They would invite him. Because in Jesus' day, it would be a pretty dull party if Jesus wasn't there.
Especially since he could bring the wine.
And that's what a lot of uptight Christians don't understand. Jesus was the life of the party. I mean, they didn't invite him because they wanted some stick in the mud. I mean, we do know he could tell a good story. He could probably laugh as loud as any of them. He was accused of being a drunkard and a glutton, among other things, which were a lot worse. So Jesus would be there. But in my case, I have decided I cannot, I forgot my word. I was going to say, it's not condone, facilitate that. Which means I couldn't act as the officiant, because that would be totally against my beliefs and the traditional, historical, scriptural understanding of the church. Does that make sense?
So what is the
So we
punishment?
don't know how that's coming down. Chief Justice Roberts, in his dissenting opinion, really talked about that separation of church and state, giving the church that freedom, that religious freedom from that. But in the act of marrying, it doesn't come from the church, it comes from the state. And I've known some ministers who, in response to this, says, I will not marry anyone.
Yeah, that would be my
You
thought.
go down to the
Give up
civil
your
authorities,
authority.
you get married, come back to the church and we'll have a celebration.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, we have a policy talking about the historical, traditional, scriptural view of marriage within the church, and I can't, on behalf of the church, conduct a ceremony, in the church or outside the church. Although somebody said that'd probably get you in trouble, but,
You mean without the permission of the church?
well, of same-sex marriage. I can, if you've given me the authority, if I want to marry him, I can marry him. And most of the time, I marry him to sanctify usually what's already going on. Now, I had one colleague who would not perform a wedding ceremony unless they had lived apart a month. I'm thinking,
Good as that.
just recognize and authorize and sanctify what's going on. Because in the Bible time, as soon as you started living together, you were kind of considered husband and wife anyway. And all a ceremony does is a public proclamation of that. And the certificate that we sign now is make sure the state understands that.
Change your name legally or.
And, you know, when I was in Ohio, I'm an associate, a gal called up. I'm sure she's in her 60s, 70s, and said my husband had passed away. I went to sign up for Social Security benefits, and Social Security told me I wasn't married. Did research. The wedding license was never registered. And within the Christian churches, I hold those documents. The church doesn't. In fact, when I do the certificate, I have to give my name, personal address, and phone number. I have to also give the name of the church because that's the authorizing
So you
body
have,
behind
so
me.
you have records clear back in Idaho?
I have them all the way to Ohio.
Okay.
And so she told me who had performed the ceremony, and I knew he was still alive. So I said, give me a minute and I'll do some checking. So I found his name and address, called him up, and told him the situation. He didn't want to talk to me. I says, fine, you're gonna have to talk to somebody.
Why didn't you want to talk?
You made a mistake.
So I hung up, called the lady back, says, here's his name and address, and if he doesn't talk to you, get a hold of the the Secretary of State's office and tell him this is who. And now we're assuming he didn't turn it in, but the other assumption is the county lost it or misfiled it.
Right.
Now
But
when I
it starts with him because he
because
starts the process.
when I sign that license, no one else, when you get married, you hand me your license and you never see it again. Because no one else signs it but me.
Here,
It used to be in the state, when I was in Astoria, they wanted the witness signatures and all that. I just put the witnesses' names down. I do the signing. And when I get done, usually on the weekend, I sign it and I hold it here, and then if they got the certificate here at the county courthouse in Deschutes County, I walk it down, go into the records department where there's wedding license, and I have them go, did all this done correctly? Yes, there it is. One time I forgot a date or something, and I just hand wrote it in. And she says, then when I talked to her the first time, you have a typewriter? I said, yeah, I had to look a long time for that typewriter because you'd never read my writing. And then when I would do somebody, you can get your wedding license anywhere in the state of Oregon, any of the 36 counties, then you can go anywhere in the state to have the ceremony done. So when I get a license from a county that isn't here, then when I mail it back, I put within a self-addressed card saying what date they received it and who's received it. And then that's on file, because if there's a question, now I got it turned in, here's the card. So,
that's why we don't have our marriage license, we have a marriage certificate.
well, you have,
License is in
the
Montana.
state requires me to give you a certificate that isn't worth the piece of paper it's printed on.
It just shows. the
Legally. Because it's a nice
Nice federal.
embossed of the Oregon Trail covered wagons and a gold seal. And that one, I took a long
It's a
time.
keepsake.
It is a keepsake.
Just to remind you when you got married in case you forgot.
And I spent a whole day
Siri.
in our computer in the office, in Publisher, setting up little text blocks that I used Old English in. And so I can print those certificates. So when I get a new one, I make about 10 copies and I fill in the information, I'm running through it, make fine adjustments, so when I print it, it's like it's been commercially printed. Of all the times I've done this, one time I had to go back to the courthouse and buy a new one, because it really got screwed up going through the print. And I explained the situation, so she let me buy one for 50 cents.
Funny.
But that one, I sign, the bride and the groom sign, and the witnesses sign, and everybody's, you know, but it's only a commemorative document. It's the one that is filed with the courthouse that is the legal document. So, what will I do? I don't know. I'm just gonna have to, I don't do a lot of marriages, but we'll just wait and see.
Just quit doing marriages at this stage.
And in my stage and my age, and who, you know,
Well, the minister of the church that I went to when I was young and wanted to be married and wouldn't marry Glenn. So,
different faiths. different
he had not been baptized yet.
That shouldn't matter for marriage, should it? Except in his own,
Every minister has their criteria.
yeah.
Right.
In fact, Jerry Brugberg thinks the church ought to be the one who regulates weddings or marriages, and I said, you're crazy.
Oh, wow.
Just think of the things we'd have to put in place for dissolving marriages, and I mean, it's just too cumbersome for the church. Let the state do it.
Congregational vote.
As long as they're of sound mind and of age and have that valid wedding license.
Well, I wasn't of age, but my dad signed for me.
And if they're young and they have the parent, you know, I need the parents' blessings. And younger ones, I want to go through marriage counseling. But in this day and age, that's pretty much worthless because
Right.
They've
I
been
don't
living
know.
together
But,
for 5
well,
years.
yeah, the last several I've done, they've been living
They
together.
know more than.
And so I'm sitting there going through my stuff because I spend a lot of time in wedding expectations in the relationship, because it is the expectations that really will crumble the relationship, because if it's unmet expectations or unmet needs. Because my definition of marriage is need satisfaction. And if those needs aren't being met, then you get angry, bitter, and resentful, and then the relationship all comes apart. So we talk about, I mean, mundane ones and
Well,
big
we
ones.
kind of got off track.
Yes, it's about weddings. So anyway, at what point do I say no to the state?
Well, just yesterday, real quickly, there was a husband and wife, they're bakers
Yeah,
somewhere.
that's the old,
That's old
Yeah.
news.
Just yesterday, it was on the news though.
yeah.
But see, that's,
And
I
they're being
think they ought to be
fined
fined.
$100,000
I
Well, they
think
have been,
They have been fined. I think they ought to.
but they've also been told they're not allowed to speak. And that's infringing on their,
Fourth Amendment.
Because
Yeah.
they're running a business. And I'm thinking, what would Jesus do? And you gotta remember, just because Jesus' presence was there doesn't mean he was condoning it or facilitating it. And they should have done it happily. And like I said last time, put little crosses on there and maybe Jesus loves you or
Yeah.
whatever.
Put poison in the cake mix.
No. But just because they're in business doesn't mean they're condoning what's going on.
Spit it in the mix.
And see, we talked about what if, I says, what if I just say I won't marry anybody but who are members of the church?
and they'll become members.
And our church here probably wouldn't mean anything, but if you're in a church of 2,000 or 3,000, and you know, I'm a member of the church, and they come to you, and yeah, I'll marry you, and then pretty soon they bring their other spouse in or partner. Ooh, how they become members? You know, so that isn't a guarantee.
But the state doesn't define marriage, it's God defined marriage.
If you're a Christian.
No, the
Yeah.
state, the Supreme Court says
I
the
know,
state
I know.
defines who can get married. And
Well, why
basic-
did they define it then? They didn't leave it up to the states, they took it from the states.
Well, the way it was becoming, it needed to be a federal law because it was creating more havoc because.
Well, 37
one of
states
the-
already
The
have
couple
it.
that sued was in Ohio. They got married in a state that recognized it. They moved to Ohio, who would not recognize it, so therefore, they couldn't get any death benefits. And so they took them to court. I mean, if I'm married in a legal state, the state I reside in should recognize that state's laws. And Ohio said no. Well, the court said yes. And basically, my understanding is, that's all they said. If somebody's married in a legal state, it has to be recognized across the board, which in effect made same-sex marriage legal
Across the state, yeah.
across the nation.
Well, it
Because,
only made it that they had to accept the other thing. It never made it legal in their state.
well, once it was
They
legal in one state, it became a recognized legality in all states. So, again, that's no sweat off me. The controversy comes in if the state requires me to perform such a ceremony. And that, at that point, I will say, no, I don't give them anything back. Now, when I first was a minister in Oregon, came to Oregon, ordained minister, going to Astoria, went to Lane County, Eugene, Lane County Court, you had to register. I had to take my ordination certificate, all kinds of documentation, and I registered. So when if I did a wedding in Lane County, I'm registered in Lane County, but I was in Clatsop County, so I had to give them real number and file number, so that people could, okay, this is where his authority is filed. Now they don't do that anymore, because I was gonna re-register in Clatsop, or, Deschutes County,
You
'cause I
can get a
didn't.
thing online, can't you, that you can do?
Well,
You don't have to be a minister.
well, what's interesting, I went to Elaine's son's wedding a couple weeks ago. Lloyd Love, I don't know if anybody who knows Lloyd
I
Love,
didn't know he's still around.
did the ceremony. But he's not a active minister under a church. He lives in Turner, he's an elder of the Christian church there. And so Dean Scherer called up the state and asked about this. And he said, he's an elder, and they were saying, they're kind of questioning it, and they said, well, he can go online and get an ordination. He's already ordained, legitimately. So they said, okay. But because when I was here, I says, I didn't have to register. Who can do marriage? Anybody? And they says, not quite anybody. But these online sites are perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, my sister bought one for $10 just so she could marry her friends.
Now, in some states, anybody can do the ceremony.
Just like a baptism.
Yeah.
Well,
Same thing.
anybody.
Yeah.
All they need is, you're the one who's doing the ceremony, and you just needed 2 witnesses.
$10.
Now-
If you're on a boat, you could probably do it out in
The captain.
East Lake.
Yeah.
You could be captain in a boat.
In Idaho, with the Mormon church so prevalent, they didn't even do anything because they couldn't register them because bishops are changing every, 6
And we're
months?
still off track.
But it really comes down
No, we're talking
to
about the
where,
authority.
when the church is regulated by the state. I mean, our incorporation is with the state of Oregon as a nonprofit. And that grants us some leeway. That means since we're nonprofit, we don't pay taxes. You can pay me salary. People's donations are tax deductible. Now, we don't have to go through all that. We don't have to have any connection whatsoever to the state. We could just be a church. But the church itself could not own the building. Somebody, if you're not a corporation, somebody has to own it. So I know churches where the pastors own the building. They're not incorporated.
Who owns this building?
The corporation of Discovery
They're
Christian
not
Church.
profit.
Oh, okay. What happens if it just dissolves?
We have it in our articles of incorporation. If we dissolve no one in this nonprofit can make any money off of it.
Who signs the deed when it?
Well, we'd probably have to appoint 2 trustees. But the assets, if there's any assets left over, they have to be distributed to a like 503C religious organization.
Like a college, like a.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
Oh,
what we
just-
didn't
just
do
a
is
question.
and I was told not to because you never know if these entities are gonna still be in existence. We could have said it's gonna be here, here, and here, but when we got to that point, we did it, they might not be in existence. So we said like, so, and
It can all go to the Christian Church of Redmond.
or, yes, or it could go to the Christian camp. What I would do, since it's not listed, I'd have everybody say, who would you like to see the money go to? And we'd pare it down to 3. And of those 3, we'd take a vote. You get to vote for one, and so maybe one gets 40%, one gets 20%, one gets 5%, and that's how it would be
Can
divided.
you do something like Shepherd's House?
No, I
No.
don't think so.
No, like-
No, it's not.
It has to be educational, benevolence, religious. And, but I'm,
Minister.
and
So-
see,
Well, that's what Shepherd's House.
you know, one is, we were talked about this legacy church, where it would go to an evangelistic association and they take that money and guarantee to try to come back in this community and restart a church. Or you could give it to a college in a scholarship. You know, students are graduating under the scholarship of Discovery Christian Church. Or you could give it to another church. Okay?
You really have a squeaky chair.
We could give it to Real Life to have a stronger presence in there. I mean, that's one of the problems is if it ever comes to that, that's going to be the sticky wicket. And that's why I say, we'd probably put a lot of things down and people would vote on them. The top 3 would get them, and then we could vote again, and whatever the percentage is, that's how it would go.
So until this year, the NFL was a 501c or whatever, they never paid any taxes.
The NFL?
Mhm.
The
Who
NFL,
got all the money?
It's
Well,
a nonprofit.
they paid taxes on their individual franchise, but the money the franchise gave to
the corporate.
the corporate was taxed. So anyway, there's a lot of regulation the state has on a church. And if they don't like what they're being told to do, then they have to break ties with the state. Like I said, if we're not a corporation, someone has to own the building, and someone has to have the ability to pay salaries.
So out of curiosity, the bakery thing had to do with a business.
Business who
A business
refuse,
refused. Now, when you guys do weddings, this church does weddings, do they charge for that? And so does
Yes,
that
we
fall
have a
under, does
charge.
that fall under the same
well,
business
see,
agreement?
but we have a policy, because of who we are as a religious church, historically, traditionally, and biblically, this is what we see as a marriage.
Right, but did the Supreme Court say that that was still okay?
Well, Roberts, in his dissent,
Yeah, Roberts
said there
did
was a
dissent.
separation, that you could
Right.
hold that religious viewpoint.
But what did the majority say?
Roberts was the majority.
Oh, no,
No, he wasn't.
no,
He was the
wasn't.
minority.
He was the
in
minority.
wedding. He was the majority in the healthcare, but he was the
Yeah.
minority in the homosexual. So I don't know. And like I said, to not have any controversies, minister just says,
Yeah, I'm not gonna do
no,
that.
and we could
I
take a
know,
vote
right.
that you would say that we no longer give, and it isn't authorization because the state authorizes, wouldn't give, well, you could say authorize their minister to perform ceremonies for the state. And once that's removed, on the certificate, I have no governing body who's regulating it, so I couldn't, in essence, sign that document.
You just have to say, and by no authority from
No
anyone.
authority vested in
I
you.
pronounce it.
So, I mean, it is getting
Or
where
white.
we have to. And, I mean, it's going to get stickier.
Well, you know what, the
Because you-
government better be careful, because if they took away all the Christians do for the communities, they would be sorely pressed
Well,
to
see, you
fill
know,
that.
there's talk, why does the church get non-profit status? Why do the people giving to the church get deductions? And they're looking at great amount of taxes. And would we still continue to be who we were if we were still taxed?
Well, we wouldn't be able to do what we do.
This congregation wouldn't, some probably have to tighten their belt, but to tax a building, that's not cheap. And to tax all of the donations, there's more taxes. And, you know, that's because we have that friendly relationship with the state. If it became hostile and contrary, that's what the church would have to decide. At what point will they not follow the state?
And a place like Shepherd's Inn, they couldn't function.
So, I mean, this, right now, we're starting to feel the effects. At what point can you scripturally say no to the state? And that's what, and Paul just says, but if you rebel against the state, that brings you under judgment. Now, John didn't say that. Let's close there. Our Father in heaven, you are Lord, and we follow you. And as we continue down our path in our country, it might become more difficult to distinguish who we are truly following. Open our eyes that we may be faithful to you. This we pray in your Son's name. Amen.
Where are we gonna start?
And I just
Same
got
place.
through the rebel. So we pretty well beat that to death through marriage.